Yes, so welcome. And so today, our topic is left out, held back, and invisible, amplifying the voices of Afro-Latino youth. And as I said, this is a topic that you all requested because clearly you are working with Afro-Latino youth and you're looking for more resources. And so we wanted to include them in our focus on working with Black youth to include their unique concerns. Just a reminder of who we are. I'm Dr. Cerisi West-Olatunji, and my co-founder of CRESTSprogram, one of our credentialing programs, is Dr. Constance West. She's here with us. And we have Kimberly Bowe, who is our graduate research assistant. We're so glad to have her. And then you often don't see her, but she's behind the scenes. And that is Jonae Bond, who is our graphic designer. Today, we have Dr. Edil Torres Rivera. He has a PhD in counseling psychology with a concentration in multicultural counseling and from the University of Connecticut Stores. He's a professor of counseling and director of the Latinx Cluster Initiative at Wichita State University in Kansas. He's a native Puerto Rican with a career of over 25 years in counseling, and he's also a veteran, an Army vet. And at present, he is our illustrious president of the American Counseling Association, and he's doing an amazing job. We cannot believe that he said yes to spend a little bit of time with us. His research interests include multicultural counseling, group work. That's a whole nother thing. You would love to hear him talk about group work and counseling, chaos theory, liberation psychology, and decolonizing approaches, indigenous counseling, Puerto Rican studies, identity development, gang, prison-related behavior. And as you will hear today, that he can focus very in a laser kind of way on the complexity of how indigenous healing techniques are necessary, required, mandatory when we're working with ethnic minority populations in the US. He is very much a social justice warrior. And I can attest to that in many, many ways. So you will hear from my colleague, my friend today, as we talk about this particular issue. Left out, held back, and invisible, amplifying the voices of Afro-Latino youth. Good afternoon, Dr. Torres. How are you today?
I'm doing fine, thank you. And thank you for inviting me and having me in your space.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We are grateful, very, very grateful. So today, when we think about, what are the learning objectives, we want you to increase your knowledge about the truths regarding the unique emotional and academic concerns for Afro-Latino youth. And we also want to increase your awareness about what we as adults can do to help these children cope with race-based stress. And we're going to talk about that, right? And expanding your knowledge about, of course, what to do about it, culture-centered, trauma-informed interventions to effectively support Afro-Latino youth. So let's get right into the research of it. Dr. West?
Yes, so for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to keep things kind of simple with the understanding that the reality is much more complex, okay? But in the simplest way that we were to define Afro-Latinos, we would be talking about individuals who self-identify their race as Black and their ethnicity as Latino, Latinx, Hispanic. Although there are some individuals who are Afro-Latino who do not identify as being Latino, Latinx, or Hispanic, but that's a separate issue. So according to the Pew Research Center, there are about 6 million Afro-Latino adults in the United States. And this number corresponds with about 2% of all US adults and account for about 12% of all Latino adults. And it's important to consider two important facts. The first one is that about 15 times as many African enslaved people were taken to the Spanish and Portuguese colonies than to the United States. So when we think, oftentimes when we think about people, the African diaspora, and we're talking about people who are descendants of the Africans who were enslaved and taken to the so-called New World, which of course wasn't new, but a lot of times we think about the United States primarily, when actually there were 15 as many African people who were enslaved and taken to Spanish and Portuguese speaking colonies. And so we should expect that there should be an even larger number of individuals who have at least a history of having African people in their DNA line, so as part of their ancestry. And if we look at what DNA results typically reflect, what we know is that amongst those people who self-identify as Hispanic, Latino, or Latinx, they have about 65% European ancestry, 18% Native American ancestry, but they also have 6.2% African ancestry, and that's on average. And of course, within different subgroups of Latino or Hispanic individuals, those numbers could vary. So for amongst people who are Mexican American or Mexican, they have a much higher percentage of Native American ancestry. And for those people who are from, for example, places like the Dominican Republic and other places like that, or Haiti, they may have, of course, a whole lot more, a higher percentage of African ancestry. So it really is about, okay, the overwhelming majority of people who are self-identify as Hispanic, Latino, or Latinx actually do have quite a bit of African biological link to Africa, whether they are aware of it, whether they self-identify as people of African descent is a separate issue. And what we know about the number of people who self-identify as Afro-Latino, or however else they might define that, that number is growing. So what we're seeing is that more and more people, particularly younger people, are self-identifying as Afro-Latino. And we also know that these are underestimates, because a lot of times populations that would probably be higher or be more likely to self-report as Afro-Latino are underrepresented in the census. So if we think about, what the numbers say about at least the adults, we can start to think about, okay, what are we thinking in terms of children? So if we know that younger people are more likely to self-identify as Afro-Latino, and we know that also in southern states, there are more people who self-identify in the United States, at least, as Afro-Latino. But if you're working with populations that are in the South of the United States, you're going to see higher levels. If you're dealing with young people, which is our focus today, we're going to look at a higher number of them being self-reporting as Afro-Latino. So these are just the numbers, and a little bit about the history that feed into these numbers. What we're going to do is we're going to talk more about what that means in terms of Afro-Latino youth in the school system, in the home environment, and in clinical mental health settings. Next slide. So we want to get you active. I know we have had a few more people who have joined us. We'd like for you to go ahead and, based upon your own experiences, if you're Afro-Latino, if you've been working with Afro-Latino youth in the classroom, if you've been dealing with Afro-Latino youth in maybe the juvenile justice setting, unfortunately, or in a mental health setting, whatever setting you're in, what have been some of the unique challenges that you've seen that Afro-Latino children and adolescents face? So what's unique to them, and important challenges to be considered when we think about trying to promote academic excellence in these youth and to promote emotional well-being in these youth. What do we need to address that's unique to them? So go ahead and put the chat. Use the chat feature here in Zoom. Just go ahead and put whatever you want. Don't worry about, okay, do I actually have an article that supports that? It can be from your own personal experience, your own experiences as a teacher, as a parent, as a clinician, as a juvenile justice person, if you work with, I don't know, wherever you are, homeless programs or whatever. Just go ahead. Just put anything. Any answer is a good answer. We'll talk about some of those things. If you're not sure, you put a question mark at the end, like, could this be an issue? I'm not saying it definitely is, but I'm kind of wondering, and we can weigh in on what we know.
Okay. All right.
Let's see how we're doing in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I love Kimberly's prompt, questions about identity. Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of this sense of belonging.
Not Black enough, not Latino enough. Exactly. Okay. Very good. Not feeling as really fit. Okay.
Mhm.
Exactly. The issue of lack of representation in the media.
Mm.
Absolutely. But there's so many. Where are they in terms of what we see in movies, commercials, etc.? Microaggressions in the workplace. Okay. Bullying. Okay. Awesome. Okay. All those are really good. I mean, so what we know from the research is that individuals or those individuals who are who self-report as being Afro-Latino report experiencing a higher number of incidents of discrimination related to a number of different things. So one of them has to do with policing, is one, being subject to aggressive policing is one of them. And actually, they report slightly higher levels of a number of types of discriminatory practices. I'm looking at internalize, absolutely. So anti-Blackness, definitely. And so there is a hesitation to even identify because of how society and communities, even within our families, right, there's a certain level of internalized racism.
And color.
And colorism, without a doubt. So I think that kind of gets us going. You all are doing a great job identifying some of the unique challenges.
That's another one too.
Targeted marketing for big company, tobacco.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I was going to invite Dr. Torres to jump in and just respond to some of these comments that are coming up of what people are talking about. I saw you nodding your head. So are some of the things that you found in your work, in your clinical work or in your outreach efforts?
Yes, they are. Plus, I think that one of the the other Dr. West is mentioning the whole historical perspective in terms of how we get here. It's important to point out that it's a new term, Afro-Caribbean, as well. We'll only look at Cuba, the Hispaniola, and Puerto Rico, okay, and of course Jamaica. And I think that the pieces that is interesting, particularly with the Spaniards, is that the Spaniards, what we didn't never been taught, the Spaniards themselves were very racist, okay, and they also was based on the color of skin. So the Spaniards were they came here to colonize. They didn't came here to stay here. They came here to colonize and take everything from here and take it back. That piece is still there. We have Afro-descendant people in every part of the Americas. And I think that sometimes that's omitted, I just find out in Argentina, they have a whole Afro-descendant group who's been there since the beginning of the colonization process, and it's never mentioned. We always talk about the Argentinians with very light skin, we have Afro-descendant people in the Argentinas. So I think that all these pieces that people put it there, plus a lot more, because all of this kind of come back to trauma. In Puerto Rico themselves, we didn't start talking about Afro-descendant people until about 20 years ago, okay? Because the way how we dealt with our colorism was to put our grandmother who was dark skinned in the kitchen. The kitchen used to be at the end of the house, So we didn't start to do that until about 20 years ago, as I mentioned before, from the sociological aspect, not from the psychological or counseling aspect, not from the mental health aspect. So I think that piece is, like all the time you will see we have a Black kid in a mainly, kind of light skinned family that every Puerto Rican have. And immediately the comments about where milkman son, so it was an illegitimate son or daughter because the color of the skin. So all these pieces add up to the whole idea of traumatic experiences, if you wish, so that's racial discrimination, the whole idea of identity confusion, particularly in the United States. Here, not from there, okay? Because you happen to be, in fact, we know the race and ethnicity, is a political piece. So I have a friend who's very Afro-descendant, very dark skinned. And when you look at her birth certificate, she was born in New York, said white, because we didn't want to admit our Afro-descendant blood. That had direct impact in how we deal with trauma. So let me just shut up in here and kind of.
Oh, no, keep going.
No,
what's going on here?
I was going to say, I recently, I'm not going to say when or where, but I had an opportunity to do a seminar. And there were a good number of folks there from Puerto Rico. And, things were going well. And then I started talking about race-based stress. And one of the members of the contingency from Puerto Rico, who tended to be more, lighter skinned, said something like, well, we don't have those kinds of race-based issues in Puerto Rico. And oh my goodness, why would that person say that? Because that took us down a rabbit hole where people started talking and raising, and talking about their own experiences of being marginalized within the culture, saying, no, that's the face we want to put out there, but that's not the reality that people are having, and being able to do that. And one person who did not raise a hand, who did not contribute, these are all grown people now, came to me during the break and showed me a picture of a parent, and it was clearly someone of African descent, and just wanted to say, I didn't say nothing, but I'm feeling all of this, and I have been traumatized by this. I've been marginalized. I've been made invisible within my context where I can't even talk about my experience. I can't feel proud of my family members, of my history, of who I am, and so on. And I thought that was interesting. I just stumbled into this internal conversation that they're having about who they are and how they want to be represented. Now, these are grown people, grown professionals. Imagine the conversation with youth, with elementary school kids, with middle school kids, with high school kids, to give them space to be able to talk about their experiences. I think that's important.
Yeah, I think that this is an interesting piece also. Again, come from the whole colonization process. It's a book by a guy by the name Morales, and he kind of presents the triangle of colonization. And what he is trying to put is, in the top, we put the Spaniard who happened to be Christian, and the bottom, the African happened to be Muslim in terms of importance that they brought in here. So that colonization process has been here from the beginning. And I think that affects directly our kid, I want to also kind of thinking about the historical perspective in which, for example, in the Dominican Republic, the people consider themselves more Indian, mulattoes, than they consider themselves Black, because they reject the dark skin in their vein, So I think that piece is very important to keep in mind, So when you see in Puerto Rico, you see somebody who's a brown skin, immediately you come back and you say, I'm very Indian, because they rather being Indian, they rather to be compared with Black people, So I think that piece have a direct impact in our psyche, who we are as people, our identity, which is another interesting piece that somebody mentioned, the whole cultural identity confusion, I just wanted also to point out that we also know, just like in the United States, the many, Latin American countries, the people who are the poorest of the poorest usually be people of darker skin or Indian descendant, darker skin, So I think that piece also have a direct impact in terms of how, we deal with trauma and so on. So, if you see my younger brother is very dark, it's kind of like my grandfather was very dark. So I can also kind of go back and say, we Indian, Tainos, right? Or I can come back and say, well, maybe African blood, because in the 19th century, most of the white people left to Mexico and Peru because Puerto Rico lost their gold, and the majority of the people staying in Puerto Rico were Black,
Yes.
African descendant people. So I think that those pieces need to be taken in consideration when we start talking about mental health, when we're talking about trauma, and how that leading to some other kind of things like, family dysfunction. And of course, I haven't touched language barrier.
Yes.
Okay, the way how we think is usually dictate to the language that we speak.
Yes.
So Dr. Cerisi just talked not too long ago in a convention that I was about the neuroplasticity and so on. So that have a direct impact on the way how we think, and if we don't touch into that when we do our interventions, if we don't touch into that when we're trying to do racism, we're not doing too much.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. So, we need to get into, so I've been delving more into neuroscience and understanding the brain, and language is very important. That's why when I was working with clients, whatever language they were speaking, and they're talking to me, sometimes I would just say, just go ahead and say it in your home language, whatever it is that you're dealing with, because you'll have the ability to be able to resolve this, to be able to deal with this, to understand it better within the context of your language. So, dealing with standard American English can sometimes be a barrier to trying to resolve these issues that we have because of that. And so we need to be very cognizant of the role of cognition, the role of neuroscience in the work that we do. Very, very important to that, even more important in understanding the Afro-Latino experience. So even with that, it's not even just when we say language, even that can be oppressive of thinking about, the Spanish as hegemony, and understanding, okay, so are people speaking a dialect that is some, Spanish influenced African dialect? Is it also something that is indigenous and utilizing the Spanish language and so on? So when we go into these different contexts, it's important. So we're thinking about, yes, definitely SES, which is influenced by racism, of course, and understanding that. But we're also talking about, well, where are folks coming from? Many of these youth that we're dealing with are also immigrant families. So we also have that issue, and about, well, okay, which country are they coming from? Are they coming from Central America? Are they coming from the Caribbean? Are they coming from South America? Where are they coming from? And what are the unique issues that they would have coming from that particular context? What have been their experiences in that context as they come into the US and they're sitting there in your office, or they're in your environment, or in your community, if you're a community organizer, or if you're a parent today with us? Are you considering why you and your family moved here? And what does that have to do with how your child may be responding to what's going on? Are you working with the educators at the school to help them to bridge between whatever it is that they're trying to do in that environment and what you believe to be the goals of education within your home context?
Seriously, that's an interesting question. Tyler Scott put it in the chat, which I think is interesting, because one of the things that we don't take in consideration as counselor is that the language that we use is a colonizer language. What does that mean? I remember when I first came to the United States that I had to put a dash between Torres Rivera, and still people call me Dr. Rivera. Well, Rivera is my mother's last name. Torres is my last name. So where I don't like too much my father, I love my mother, that's not who I am. So every time, so the language, they're trying to put a dash between my two last names, it was divisive. So the idea sometimes on how we had to, put a checklist of where we are is part of the language that we use to actually divide us as people, rather than unify us as people. So I think that we need to keep that in mind as well, and how language could be also very divisive, and how language could also, affect the way how we kind of interpret the word that we see.
Exactly. So the issue of racial cultural identity development is important here. You've heard us talk, those of you who've come to our webinars before, where we talk about the research around racial cultural identity development, how we have over 3 decades of this research that consistently provides us with the similar kinds of outcomes. So what we know is that those children who have a strong sense of their group cultural identity tend to be more, have a higher degree of wellness, make better decisions in terms of their friends. They also have higher academic achievement. It's like overall, it is a very good correlate to good living. So the issue is we can't ignore Afro-Latino youth. We must begin to think about how do we reach out to them? How do we help them to communicate? So like the things that you were talking about, Dr. Torres, about this issue, right, of understanding what do you check off? It's like with a clear understanding of who you are, there's a separation between what are they asking for, right? What do I need to do here? Do I want to even answer this? This is an oppressive question, et cetera. What, or I do, because I know if I do this, I'm going to get benefits or whatever. But it doesn't penetrate the identity. I know who I am. I know what I'm about. I understand my contributions. I understand and appreciate myself and my reference group. I understand how do I advocate for myself. I understand how do I, create coalitions with other like-minded people. That is what we need. So when they have that, when their minds are right, they are able to respond to those things. When there's lack of clarity, when they're confused about their identity, then that aggravates it. It creates more confusion. It's like, which am I? Am I this? Am I that? And so on. But we understand that. So when we think about interventions, we're back where we started in terms of addressing race-based stress. It's like we know having a strong group identity of understanding who you are, understanding your value system, understanding those things, we know arms children against the micro and macroaggressions in a pathological system of racism. And that is what we need to do, is to be able to work with children. We cannot ignore these children, right? And I think what it is I think we're confused when we encounter these students. We may look at them and think, well, I don't know how to deal with them. I don't know whether I should work with them in terms of being, Latinx youth, or should I bring them into, the African-centered activities and so on. And so we need to be educated. We need to know how should we respond? What tools can we use? And of course, we're going to talk about that today. Absolutely. So we only have a little bit of time with Dr. Torres. So let us move on. Let me get back to the PowerPoint and go to research slide number 2. So what I want to offer is, what's going on. So we heard Dr. Torres talk a little bit about what he knows about working with this population. So I provide you with some information from some research studies. So one of the things that we know is Afro-Latino youth are subject to higher levels of psychosocial stressors that affect their psychological health. You heard Dr. Torres talk about that. Experienced through negative emotions and depressive symptoms. Negative emotions, we heard that, right? We heard you talking about that in the chat, right? About this idea of low self-esteem, exactly. About having depressive mood, right? That can, appear to you as students that can internalize that by, anxiety and depression, or externalize that with the acting out behaviors and so on. So we need to be aware to look for a range of responses and to understand that all of those are related to race-based stress and trauma. The second is higher psychosocial stressors in terms of their physical health, impacting their cortisol levels, right? So now we're back to neuroscience again, right? Of understanding the impact of living in a racist society and what that does to our youth. So we've got higher levels of hypertension And we also get health behaviors like smoking and alcohol use and abuse. So we need to be on the lookout, right? And be able to connect it. So not to see that as symptoms, not to see that as causal, but to see that as symptoms, to understand that children may be responding to certain stimuli in the area. And then finally, the idea that Latino immigrant youth who identify as Black reflect lower educational achievement than their lighter skinned counterparts. Now, we are not trying to say there's anything in the DNA. We are far from saying that. Instead, we're talking about that these youth are more impacted. They're greatly impacted by the micro and macroaggressions within a racist environment. So they're experiencing it more acutely, right? And so we know that it is this issue that's related to how they look, right? And dealing with racism. So because of racism, they are going to be more acutely impacted, right? So I think I have a poll for you. Let's see if I can pull up the poll. I do not see the poll. Let me stop the share.
We might want to skip it anyway, because we only have a certain amount of time with Dr. Torres. So once we can think about it afterwards. Yeah.
Good idea.
We want to get all of the wisdom. I want you to share as much of your wisdom with us today as possible before our time with you expires. So
exactly. So I'll pass it off to Kimberly, because I see that there's some questions in the Q&A. So let's go with that. Before she gets to that, I saw you were looking down and taking notes, perhaps. I don't know, Edil, when I was talking. So did you want to add to what I said before we get to their questions?
No, just the thing that you kind of summary, but the whole idea of the colonial legacy is an important piece, because that led into something. Remember, the Afro-Latino ancestor was slave as well, even though the way how Spain and Portugal deal with slave was very different from the UK, still was slave. Okay, so that piece is important. I think that it is important to look at that whole slavery and colonization process, but also to look at the whole idea of cultural and religious trauma. Okay, we never talk about the cultural and religious trauma. That's part of who we are. If you look at how many all survived, let's say Maria in Puerto Rico, it was pretty much based on our religious belief. But also, the Catholic Church themselves have a colonial history that we need to deal with. When they displaced the religion from Catholic to evangelists, immediately the displaced woman and displaced like the Black Jesus that we have in many of our Latin American churches. There's always high in some kind of corner. You never see it, by the way. So and then the whole piece you just talk about the school trauma because of bullying, because the color just came, and I do the song of the Mythman and know that your father. So all these kind of pieces, that you mentioned, it's important to mention, because that's part of the collective trauma, the complexity of the trauma of Afro-Latinos in the United States.
Wow. Yeah. I'm going to say something here. What came to mind when you talked about the Black grandmothers being in the kitchen, and now you're talking about Black Jesus being in the corner as a function of colonization, right? And the trauma that we experience in terms of understanding who we are, or how others view us, right? The key to our liberation is being able to go back and get the Black Jesus out the corner, getting our darker skinned, more African grandmothers out the kitchen. Because really what that says is that we have internalized this idea that some aspects of who we are should be hidden, should be intentionally lost, right? Should become invisible. So many times people talk about, my grandmother was Indian, or I don't know where that came from. Like, it has to be illegitimate if they're dark, right? It's like, no, that's about reclaiming all aspects of who we are. Because as long as we feel ashamed of any aspect of who we are, right, it's going to affect how we feel about ourselves, how we interact with each other, how we love one another. how we raise our children, right? And our expectations of each other. And children are so sensitive to all of that, because that's what they're doing. They're trying to figure out the world. They can pick up on all that stuff. And they're going to say, what does that say about me? What does that say about how I look? What does that say about my background? What does that say about, what my potential is in this world? And we cannot continue to perpetuate the trauma that we've experienced on our children, right? So we're gonna have to pull this stuff out, and we're gonna have to acknowledge who we are, not who we're comfortable with saying who we are, but all aspects of who we actually are, right? For our own well-being, but especially for the well-being of our children and future generations.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've been doing when I work with Puerto Rican children is one of the things about who was Miguel Rivera. Miguel Rivera was actually a slave who freed himself, and the governor had to ask them for a loan because he was the richest man in Puerto Rico. So the government had no choice to go to a black man to ask for money. And that's a sign of pride, in which, an Afro-descendant man had to bail out the country, but that history is not being told to us, and I think that that's a piece in which, you start to give affirmation on how if you look at the back of my Zoom, you see three figures of there. The one in the middle is an African slave, because all three of them is a trio who compose who I am as a man. So it's white, Indian, and a slave right in the middle. So I think that part had to be kind of put out in terms of affirming that we have African roots, and we proud of those African roots, because that's not, that's usually not being told to us in history. So that part had to be part of our process of reaffirming the African roots of our Afro-Latinos.
Love it. I was going to ask about those three figures, but I'm glad that you brought that up right on time. Okay.
I also, there's a question in the chat about language, how language impacts cognition, and how Afro-Latino, Afro-Latinx express or understand their trauma. So there are some things. So one is I wanted to highlight an article that Dr. Torres and I and some other colleagues of ours co-wrote. It was called "Language as a Form of Subtle Oppression Among Linguistically Different People in the United States of America." And that's a great article. It was published a while ago, back in 2008, but it still has relevance today for us to begin to understand about language usage and communication patterns that are different. So in thinking about what are they in mainstream, in the dominant culture, and to understand how we exist in terms of our language, and be able to begin to do that, to unpack that. We don't talk about that at all. If anything, the dominant understanding is that our people don't speak good English. That is pretty much it. That's how people take us. We just don't speak good English, right? Instead of being educated about communication and language and understanding that. There is a wonderful scholar. Her name is Dr. Noma Lemoine, and she writes about communication patterns. She specifically talks about African-American language and the construction of the language, and understanding that Black people in the diaspora continue to reflect the language structure consistently now in the diaspora all over, that reflects West African language construction. And she lectures to demonstrate to us the direct connection. So she can take some phrases that are used, right? And she can connect it and show you the connection to West African language structure. to see that we're speaking American language, we're speaking English, we're speaking Spanish, but we're doing it still using West African structure, language structure, right? So that's very important for us to understand, again, in terms of our thinking, our cognition of how are we stringing things together? How do we make sense, right, of things? What is the meaning of what it is that we're saying? So it's important for us to begin to learn about these things. It's difficult to be able to answer. I guess it's a long answer, Camila, to your question about that, but it is about us reaching outside of our disciplines and learning about communication, learning about language, learning about cognition, learning about neuroscience in order for us to appreciate, to decolonize the way in which we've been trained in order to work with our youth. We need to have that information. So we're just giving you two tools. One is the article. The other is a scholar. You can look her up. She's got books. She's got presentations. She's got a website that is chock full of resources that you can download. Again, we'll put it in the chat, but her name is Dr. Noma Lemoyne. And so Kimberly has a link for you. So you can take a look at that. But that's the short answer to a very long answer that, and the task of decolonizing our thinking is a lifelong. It's not something that we can put on our to-do list and it's done. We are constantly ourselves being impacted. So it doesn't go away. We're in a pathological system and it's going to be impacting us regularly on a daily basis. So even with the knowledge that we have, we all here on this panel are still dealing with racism and are impacted by racism. So it is not something that we just do and we're done with it. It's something that we constantly struggle with. Absolutely.
Seriously, I put two things in the chat. I put there was a study done way back when in terms of how language affect brainwave, and there's a study about Mandarin and English. Okay, so I put that in the chat so you can download it. And then there's a guy, I like to go to South Africa to look for scholars in liberation psychology when a lot of people happen to forget that the colonization process started in the global south. You know, it's another guy who talked about the colonization of the mind. Happened to be a South African. You know, another person is Amilcar Cabral. Another person is Albert Emin. You know, so I mean, I have names and reference all over, most of them from the south, because that's what the movement started. So you know, I know that the whole culture piece, you know, had to be based on affirmation, but also the work of those elders, of those scholars who actually knew that we're talking about, help us in trying to formulate our therapy approach in working with people who happen to have African blood.
Very nice.
Absolutely.
Rich discussion.
Absolutely. I don't know, is there another question that people have posed that we can cover before our 8 minutes are up with Dr. Torres?
So there is a question in the chat. What if you are working with children, families, adults in social services context? How can we be trauma-informed and conscientious of Afro-Latinx backgrounds when serving them?
My answer usually is a simple one. I mean, it's not simple because it's complex, but the first one is do your homework. One of the things that I like to do is, like, I came to Wichita. The very first thing that I did to Wichita is to find out my community, the history of the community. Interesting enough, for Wichita State, the building of Wichita State used to be an Afro-descendant community. Okay, so I was always trying to figure out how come, you know, they have so many African descendant peoples around the university. It's because that's where the university was placed in the first place. So the history have a history of displacement. Even though the university came here, the university actually displaced a lot of these people, okay? And now they try to kind of do something back. So once you do your homework about how that people got here, what was their experiences, then you can start to work from there. But if you go there as knowing everything, and I know this, you heard this in Counseling 101, and sometimes we go there as experts. We're not experts in anything. The clients are the experts. Carl Rogers said that in 1970, but sometimes we try to do an intervention without actually knowing the history of the person there. I think that's a good place to start. And then once you start there, then you start to kind of find out where do you need to work. And usually most of the issue have to do, again, with the whole trauma discrimination and also the trauma of lack of identity, and then from there, you have something to work with. But I usually like to start understanding the history of how these people got here first.
Well, thank you. And then another question that we have, let's do this. What are some of the barriers to Afro-Latino children and families accessing and completing mental health treatment services?
Language is number one.
Access as well. As access, this is one piece that we don't mention much. I know Cerisi and I, we have talked about that. And I mentioned Cerisi because I worked with Cerisi for a long time. But one of the pieces we usually is lack of training for the people who provided the service. And I think that lack of training is always an issue. Because just because you have a master or a PhD, that does not give you the expertise of working with particular populations. You have to immerse yourself in that particular culture. Every time people come back ask me questions about Puerto Ricans, and I say, well, I happen to be one out of 3.5 million in the island, so I don't know if I can answer all the questions. So if you go from Puerto Rico, let's say to Carolina, to Loíza, who happen to be African descendant mainly, versus the place where I come, the projects on the west side of the island, it's two different cultures. So in order for me to go work in Loíza, I have to go back and immerse myself again in what that Afrocentric community is all about, okay? So I think that's probably one of the biggest barriers, lack of training. And when you have the desire to help, if you don't have the training, you could probably go and do some harm rather than some good.
That's right. Further aggravate. We don't want to do that. We do not want to further aggravate people's trauma. Instead, we want to move in the other direction. We want to try to minimize the trauma, right? But we need to have the skills. It's not going to happen because we wish it away, because we feel that we're good people, right? That's not going to do it. We need to undo the damage in terms of the training. What we need to do is to supplement what we've learned on how to work with clients, how to work with children, how to parent. We need to supplement, or we need to just throw out some stuff and not use it. We need to learn. We need to acquire knowledge. We need to acquire the skills in order for us to better meet the needs of our children. This is necessary. We need to do this. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the hard work there is acknowledging that there are things that are unhealthy, right? So if we're a parent, we have to acknowledge that some of the things we say, some of the things we're thinking, some of the ways that we parent are unhealthy. Not all of them. So we're going to get some things right, a lot of things right. It's okay. You could be a great parent and have some areas, some pockets in which you're saying and doing things that actually either ignore or exacerbate or actually traumatize our children. What do we say when we get angry? Are we making comments about skin color? Are we making comments about you're like some person in the family that may, I don't know, not, but for whatever reason, meet society's standards, right? What are we doing? Same thing in terms of, if you're a teacher, are there things you're doing? And, not intentionally, but unintentionally traumatizing children. And when you intend to help, it's okay, to do that, to go back and look and say that, yeah, I kind of got some things wrong. There are a lot of good things too. but acknowledging that, yeah, there's some things that I've done. I was trained to do. I was taught to do that. And I've been doing that for I don't know how many years. And I probably inadvertently hurt some people or ignored somebody's pain. But now is a new day and I'm ready to go and make some changes, right? I can't undo what I did years ago, but I can make sure that I don't do any more of that. Right? I can tell you, people can ask the kids, I hate to say that. I remember, I'm going to do my example. I remember talking to my mom and she said something to me that I thought was just so hurtful. I remember telling her, you're damaging my self-esteem. She was like, what? And she was thinking, I didn't know you could even say that to your parents. You're damaging my self-esteem. It's like, yeah, that type of thing makes me think this about who I am or who we are. And, it's okay to be humble enough to ask, am I doing anything in the classroom? Is there something I've said or done at home? Or are there ways in which I discipline you that, damages your self-esteem, right? And not to say that I'm going to, not give you any punishment, but I can refrain from making comments of a nature that really is unhealthy, that makes you feel good about who you are, how you look, or how the world sees you. Something like, it's okay to say I made a mistake, or hey, I gotta not do. We talked about throwing away some of this training as professionals, as also as people. We've all been trained in this society about how to see ourselves and people who look like us, and to go back and say, yeah, that might have been how I grew up, but I'm not going to continue that. We're pulling people out of the kitchen and corners into the forefront. And rather than feeling ashamed or creating shame in our children, we're going to create pride and affirm them, like Dr. Torres said. So we want to be able to do that work.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very good YouTube, actually it's a TED Talk. It's an African woman from Nigeria. It's something about different story.
The danger of a single story.
There we go, the danger of a single story. That's it. Which is actually is very telling because actually, she go on, it's very short, but it's very telling because she talk about how we formulate our worldview based on what being taught, without actually experiencing anything, only on one story. So I think that's kind of the piece that as parents we need to pay attention to, the my story is not the only story. One of many, so I think that will help us just kind of getting, I love that I usually use my classes because actually they get to you to think about what other stories are missing.
I think I shared that with you like 2 decades ago when we were teaching together, and I still use it as well. I still use it. It is still a wonderful TED Talk, and she's a wonderful storyteller, number one. Right. Number two, she self-discloses. So she tells it not like she's shaming people, but she's talking about how she came into her awareness and about the need to decolonize. I love that, because one of the things that I talk about a lot in terms of decolonizing is to remind people that you are thinking the oppressor's thoughts and you don't even know it. Right? You're not even thinking for yourself, right? So we have to do the work. We have to self-reflect. We have to think critically about what we're saying and doing as parents, as educators, as mental health professionals, all of that. We need to be able to do that because it's just, we've been scripted. So she starts, I'm not going to tell the whole story, but she's a writer and she starts by saying, she used to write about experiences that she didn't have, about snowy days and stuff. And she's like, I don't know anything about snowy days, but that's how I learned how to write. And that is what we do. We learn how to educate. We learn how to parent. We learn how to work with our clients from somebody else's lens. We're looking through someone else's eyes. And we have to learn to take those off, see with our own eyes, use our own experiences, use our own values in order to work with our clients, in order to work with youth. And that is what we're saying here. And so we do recommend that, The Danger of a Single Story. It is such a beautiful example of a bunch of things, as we've said, and it gets the story across very easily, very easily.
Awesome.
Friends, I have to go. I have to get ready to another meeting.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for joining us. Don't go away, everybody. We've got some recommendations on next steps and all that stuff. And also, Dr. Torres set us up very nicely for training. So we've got training for you to offer you. So thank you. Thank you, Dr. Torres. You're amazing. We love you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye now. Wow, we covered a lot.
I know.
That was 60 minutes of power. That was really fantastic. I keep coming back to this image of restoring our Black ancestors and Black deities, right, to their rightful place.
Yes. Yes,
As a
and our
way.
children don't know that, right? So whether they're Afro-Latino youth or, whatever in the diaspora, we have to include everybody. We need to include everybody to understand, because they're suffering, they're experiencing the difficulties because of their connection to their Black ancestors and so on. So they're experiencing that without the explanation, without being armed, without any buffers. They're experiencing that. So we need to definitely reach out to them and be able to arm them and help them to cope and so on. So Dr. Torres gave us a great intro, because he said, what do you need to do? Someone asked, how do we get started? Well, he gave us that.
Do your homework is what he said.
Yep. So here we are, Dr. West.
Yes. So as a reminder, CRESTSprogram is a community in which we offer virtual trainings. You can go online through our videos on demand library, and we have a lot of different topics. Putting the Race and ACEs really focuses on children and what we need to do to really understand, so that we don't misinterpret their behavior, that we can excise racism from the home, school, and clinical settings. We have a research-focused course called CREST Achieve that looks at emancipatory research and helping people to achieve social justice through the research process, and to level the playing field to include community members at the ground level. And then we have a host of other topics as well that we cover. So you can check out our courses on Thinkific. We also do customized training. That's on the next slide. So if you have a need for training and you would like us to, on the slide after that, we can tailor make some training programs for you. So if you want us to focus more on some of these topics like Afro-Latino youth, or anything like that, if you want to include any coaching, or if you want us to do, baseline assessments. So we're talking about whole teams, whole schools, whole school districts, whole community groups, et cetera. We also offer trainings of that nature that would be specific to your needs. So we would meet with you and talk about what it is that you want to achieve. And we would design a training program just for you and your team. Next slide. We also offer, we have merchandise and other resources with everything from our newsletter to, of course, these monthly webinars, concept papers, videos, podcasts, etc. So you can always check out our website at CRESTSprogram.com, and that'll get you started. And I know Kimberly has just put in information about how you can access our website. So you have that. Next slide.
Right.
All right.
Normally we talk about the updates at the beginning, but we wanted to get all the juiciness of Dr. Torres. And so we knew we only had him for an hour. And so we moved this to the end, but just some reminders and updates about what's going on. So we know that a lot of times people have grants that end. I know I have a grant that's ending on October 31st. And so sometimes people reach out to us and they say, we've got our grant is ending at the end of September, October, November, whatever. And they're like, we need you to do some training with us right away. So, hey, we're available. Also, we are doing a podcast. Is it this Thursday?
Yes.
And it's with the Grandma Polly Show. And it's going to be live on Facebook and Instagram, I think. And we'll be talking about what it is that we do, but we'll be talking to parents and so on. And so we have a slide on that, so we'll tell you about that. Just a reminder, I mentioned to someone's here from Oregon, and I asked how far is, I think you said Salem is from Portland, and we'll be in Portland in February for the ESEA conference. And so who knows, we'll be able to meet up, or maybe you're coming to the conference. And of course, we always accept donations. We got our first donation the other day, and we really appreciated it. Somebody just said, I think they called it a love offering. And so we would love to have a love offering. That is wonderful. The fall newsletter edition is it available, Kimberly?
As long as Janae has it up on the website, it should be available, but please sign up and we can definitely make sure you get the newsletters going forward as well.
Awesome. And then we definitely want you to fill out the post-webinar survey. This is how we were able to develop this particular topic, is because in the post-webinar survey, there were folks who were saying they wanted to know more about working with Afro-Latino youth. And so please, it's important. We do read what you say, and we try to incorporate any suggestions that you have and so on. So please, we ask you, please complete the post-webinar survey. Yep, so that's what that is. And I think the link to that is put in the chat. So please go click on that link and go to that. Sometimes we have it set up so that Zoom automatically provides that for you. I'm not sure if that's there today. So there was a question of what can we do? Of course, Dr. Torres, I cannot outdo him at all. He has given you probably the most amazing response, a comprehensive response on what to do, but we offer you some evidence-based interventions here. We've got the Stepping Back program. There's also an empowerment program that was developed a while ago. I use Cuentos a lot in working with Afro-Latino youth of storytelling, right? But the Cuentos really are about those stories that are contextualized within the culture, right? And then storytelling, Tell Me a Story. Another one is a program and the intervention in clinical session of releasing ethno-racial anger. So in other words, allowing people permission to be angry about the micro and macroaggressions that they're experiencing due to racism. And then also the idea of a psycholinguistic history interview. And again, you see this emphasis on the language and how the language is both a liberator as well as an oppressor. And so we need to talk about how standard American English, or just whatever the dominant language is often used as a way to constrict youth. And what we want to do is to give space for them to voice their concerns and to express themselves within their own context. And we have some agencies, Dr. West.
It's just a quick little list of agencies that focus on Afro-Latino youth. We have certain branches that focus on Afro-Latino youth. So the Hispanic Heritage Foundation, the National Hispanic Institute, and some others here that are listed. This is not a comprehensive list. There's other organizations, agencies, and groups that also focus on Afro-Latino youth. But this is just to kind of get you started. I've also shared a link to a list of books for children and adolescents that I believe was compiled by Essence Magazine that really focused on the issues, some of the unique issues that are faced by Afro-Latino children and adolescents. So check that out as a resource, along with all the other articles and links to the TED Talk that Dr. Wasabatunji and Dr. Torres were talking about. Would be a good place for you to start your journey to improve or enhance your knowledge of this area.
So want to talk about what to do now. Time for action. So if you are an educator, whether you're a teacher, a leader, whatever it is that you're doing within the school context, you need to incorporate the nuances of immigrant families, especially those of African heritage, based upon their home country. So again, we get this idea that they're not a monolithic group. Even the Afro-Latino community is not monolithic. It really depends on where they're coming from, what are the circumstances, what is the reason why they've immigrated, and so on, and also the language that they speak and the dialects that are different in different geographic regions. If you're a parent, expose your children to cultural and historical information about leaders of Afro-Latino heritage. They need to know about heroes and sheroes that look like them, sound like them, talk like them, act like them. It's needed. It helps to raise their self-esteem. It helps to give them a sense of belonging. We definitely need to do that. If you're a mental health clinician, learn to incorporate culture-centered interventions that specifically address the unique concerns of Afro-Latino youth. And again, go to our website, our website or our training site, so you can think about whether or not you want to take the training, African-centered counseling theories and intervention. So if you want to begin the process of decolonizing the way in which you've been trained, you're going to need to know about different theories that are out there that are not Eurocentric. You need to know about interventions that are not Eurocentric, that build upon the values of the clients that you serve. And so we offer that opportunity for you to jump off that Eurocentric bandwagon and think about more effective ways of working with Afro-Latino youth. Finally, no matter who you are as an adult, you need to obtain more training. And that essentially is what Dr. Torres said right before he left. He's like, there's no getting around that. You just need more training. And so we offer one opportunity for you. I'm sure there are others, but we are here for you. That's all that we do in creating this communiversity. We offer an opportunity for you to do a do-over and to see it differently. Okay. Again, because we don't want anyone to forget, we rely very heavily upon your feedback. And so just a reminder again, please complete the post-webinar survey. The link is in the chat. Please let us know what you liked, what you want to see more of, and so on here. Let's see. So this is October. So yeah, today was Amplifying the Voices of Afro-Latino Youth. Next month is locks, wigs, and everything between, Black women, girls, and emotional wellness. So we're going to talk about hair because that tends to clear the room. It is a divider, and as people talk about that, and as we know, there are issues in terms of people having issues on their jobs, about children being kicked out of school because of their hair and so on. And so let's talk about it. Let's talk about how that relates to how we feel about our emotional and psychological well-being. And then we end every year. This is our third annual, I believe, infusing Black history and culture into your holiday celebrations. So we'll be talking about not only celebrations that are religious or faith-based. We'll also be talking about those cultural ones that are not faith-based. We'll be talking about folks who don't celebrate any holidays whatsoever, but everybody else is. So we're going to give some suggestions. What should your family do if it doesn't celebrate any of those holidays? What can you and your family do during this time? So we're going to talk about all of that. And it's the only time that we don't do a webinar and we actually can see everyone who attends, and you get to talk and we get to see you. And so therefore it's limited. It's a limited number of seats. So if you think that's of interest to you, I suggest that you register for that early on so that you can get in there and be a part of that great experience.
Yeah, I just want to mention really quickly that it is a show and tell. So for people who've done it every year, everyone knows that you're welcome to bring something that embodies your history, your culture, something that really affirms you, affirms for your children who they are and their backgrounds. So it could be anything from a decoration, something that you cook, drink that you make, or music, movie that you watch, a book from your childhood, or something that your children really enjoy. So it gives you a chance to actually share with us as well. And again, it is limited, like Dr. Westover-Tunji said, we limit that to 95 people and it sells out. I know people have already started registering. So if you think that's something you might want to do, I would suggest that you go ahead and register for that. And of course, next month we're focusing on hair, real serious issue. I definitely had clients who considered themselves to be Afro-Latino, and they talk about issues of hair growing up and in their family. So I think that even though every month when we have our topics, they're not specifically about Afro-Latino youth, there are aspects that apply. And next month, I think there will definitely issues that we'll cover that have been issues for the Afro-Latino youth that I've seen in my clinical practice, and maybe issues for you or some of the clients that you see. So we look forward to having you there next month, and then hopefully you'll join us in December for our show and tell, holiday or non-holiday webinar. And as a quick reminder, Dr. Westover-Tunji has already covered this, but we're going to be basically in 2 days, we'll be on Conversations with Grandma Polly. If people are familiar with the Big Rig Kids book series, it's a book series that was developed by Miss Renee Brown, who is the author of the Big Rig Kids book series, as well as a stage play. And she is the person who hosts Conversations with Grandma Polly. And she talks about all sorts of issues, focusing on, what youth need to discuss. Some of the issues have to do with trauma. Some of them have to do with decreasing mental health stigma in communities of color. So the purpose is for the topics to be covered in a manner that generates conversation, dialogue between parents and children, particularly Black children, but really, she talks about issues that impact a wide variety of racial and ethnic groups as it relates to children. And so everything from racism to bullying and, I said, mental health stigma. She tackles really tough topics. And the point is to have parents in a developmentally appropriate manner address those really important issues, because kids are struggling with those things. It's not that they're not, they just may not bring those topics to their parents or teachers or even mental health providers without having some spark that allows us to have those types of dialogues with them. So you can join us on Friday if you can. If not, I believe it should be available online for quite some time, so you'll be able to access it if you go to their website.
And again, that's Thursday, not Friday. Thursday, October 19th.
Sorry, did I say Friday?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, it's Thursday, so 2 days from now, October 19th. That's from 7 to 8 p.m. I will be on Eastern
time. I noticed that we didn't, that's not on the flyer, but it's Eastern time. So we know we have people from all over the country who are in different time zones. So just a reminder, this is 7 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday, October 19th. So yeah, it would be great to see some of our folks there. We'll be with Grandma Polly and Renee Brown, and she'll have a lot of her audience there. So yeah, it'd be nice if we had some of our folks who are there as well. So feel free to join us to talk about parent stuff, parent and child. Yeah, we like that. And as always, we've got, connect with us. So if you like what we're doing, and some of you were in there saying, this is great, we love it, let other people know and follow us on our social media and so on. We would love to see you there and to let you be in the know right away. So yeah, thanks for being with us today. I believe that we've answered every question. Let me ask Kimberly, just capable graduate research assistant. Are there any outstanding questions or anything we need to address?
So there's nothing in the Q&A or the chat, but if you've got time for one more question, I'm sure I could come up with one.
Well, we don't have to at all. We don't need to generate one. I just wanted to make sure that everybody was covered and so on. But yeah, that's where we are. So we do have time, but it's really just up to you.
If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, put them in the chat. Happy to answer them. Real quickly, I'll round out with this. If someone was to take away one big theme from today, what would you two say is the big theme from today?
For me, I would say one of the things that I learned, my takeaway in doing the research to prepare for you, is that we often talk about the issues with Black and Brown youth, and we get the stats, but I didn't realize that a lot of the stats for the Latino youth needs to be disaggregated. That when we separate out Afro-Latino youth from the information, the research on Latino youth, that the Afro-Latino group is doing far worse than the average when we take a look at what's going on for Latino youth. So I would say, don't just take that what we know about Latino youth and move forward with that, disaggregated to take a look at how they may be experiencing more acute kinds of issues related to race-based stress. So don't just take, all of them, all of Latino youth, and sort of lump them all together. Disaggregate Afro-Latino youth, because they have some issues that are quite unique to their experiences based upon skin color and physical characteristics and things like that, that serve as barriers for them.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. So it is about, the overall average or what we know about a group. A lot of times there's a whole lot more diversity within a group than there are across groups. And so I think in terms of thinking about that, that's super important. But I think the most salient thing that came out for me was really about this idea of what's hidden, right? And so in terms of language, sometimes it's the impact of language is hidden, right? There's certain things that we think and feel that we can't express using the language that we have been given if we want to be more congruent with our history, right? So maybe terms or concepts that aren't available to us in Spanish or in English, but that we feel very strongly and that are consistent with who we maybe were independent of colonization, right? That we have to be able to be aware of that and to come up with a remedy. So maybe it's not going to be what's spoken, or we have to give ourselves permission to use maybe what people would call, broken English or broken Spanish, because it expresses how we truly feel. It's not actually broken, it's actually what we've brought back through the decades, through the centuries, from when we might have been in our right mind, right? So we don't want to toss that out. And then the other thing was that I know I said this a bunch of times, but it kind of blew my mind. I've been thinking about this, and I've read about these things before, but it kind of came together today, this idea that I knew that, especially in South America, there were a whole lot of images of deities, right? Whether we're talking about Black Madonna, or we're talking about images of Christ or of God that were very African, had African features, facial features, etc. And they've gotten hidden away over time with colonization. That was one. So the idea when Dr. Torres said that, they were put in a corner somewhere in the church or in a basement or something. And I also remember reading articles and seeing videos or documentaries about in Latin America, that the idea was to marry or to have children with people who were lighter than you, to sort of remove this African features or darker color, because it was advantageous in, a society that was based upon race and color. So grandmothers were hidden, grandparents who appeared a certain way. The pictures were either taken, removed from books, or people stopped talking about them. So this thing of missing relatives, missing or hidden aspects of who we are, right? We need to go back and uncover those things, embrace those things, exalt those things, have pride in those things, and communicate that with our children so that they can feel good about who they are, and giving them examples, like Dr. Torres said, about, examples of people who have achieved, or people in our history who, were about liberation, so they can see themselves as being heroes and being models and examples, people who achieve academically, people who resist what the world says about us, and people who are healthy enough to embrace all aspects of who they are and all aspects of their history. It says a lot, right? And when we embody that, we set the example for our children, right? So that means that's a part of our homework we have to do to get to that point.
Thank you both so much. Still no questions in the chat or the Q&A?
Well, I'd say we go to our closing jingle and close it out. I think we've covered a lot today, a lot to think about and digest, let it marinate, and see where we end up, and prepare. I'm ready to get prepared for next month. We're talking about hair, which is a hot topic. So I guess we'll close things out. Dr. Weston, Lieutenant G. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone. See you next month.
Bye.